Hey there, and a massive welcome back to the Deep Dive. Really glad to have you tuning in today.
It's great to be here. So today we're really honing in on something incredibly valuable for you, the learner.
We are indeed. We're talking about crafting truly efficient routines for learning English.
And we know you, our listeners, you value getting to the heart of things right quickly, effectively.
Exactly. Without getting completely bogged down in, endless information. You want the strategies that actually work.
And that's precisely what we're aiming for today. We've sifted through a really diverse range of sources.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Well, think articles from places like Exam and BSL Idiomas. We've got insights from Social Learn English and Talkin'. Practical tips from K&N, Idiomas Brazil, and Topway. Some blog posts from English Central and Jonas Persson.
Quite a mix.
Yeah, perspectives from Nação Fluente, transcripts from YouTube channels Rota da Valencia and Ellen Fernandez.
Oh, interesting. Video transcripts, too.
Definitely. And even a snippet from an Amazon book and some really relatable personal experiences shared by Learn English with Tiffany on YouTube.
Wow, okay. That is quite the collection, isn't it?
It is. And our mission basically is to pull out the golden nuggets from all of this.
The key insights, the practical steps.
Exactly. Steps you can actually take to build an English learning routine that fits your life.
Right. No matter how busy you are right now or, what level of English you're currently at.
That's the goal.
Okay, so let's get right into it then. Where do we start?
Well, I think let's begin by just acknowledging a feeling that many of you listening might recognize.
Okay.
That journey of learning English, especially when you're trying to, push past that intermediate plateau.
Yeah, that infamous plateau.
Right, and get to a more advanced level. It can sometimes feel like climbing a really steep hill. The folks at Social Learn English, they touch on this quite a bit.
Absolutely. You might feel kind of stuck, maybe not seeing the progress you once did. It can be frustrating.
Very. But here's a key insight also from Social Learn English. While there's no magic formula, no silver bullet.
If only.
Yeah, if only.
Oh.
But the real power lies in, smart organization, making a consistent commitment of your time, and actively engaging with the language.
So it's not necessarily about studying harder?
Not always, no. It's often about studying smarter.
Right. That makes sense.
And they emphasize this idea of truly living the language. And the beauty is, you can start integrating this in really simple ways, almost effortless ways.
Like how? Give us some examples.
Okay, so think about switching your phone's language setting to English.
Oh, okay. Constant exposure.
Exactly. It's subtle, but it's constant. Or filling your playlists with English music. But not just this background noise, right? Like actively listening to the lyrics sometimes.
Trying to catch phrases, yeah.
Exactly. And of course, watching movies and shows in English. Maybe start with subtitles in English even.
That helps train the ear, right? And exposes you to natural speech pattern.
Precisely. These small changes, they seem small individually, but they create this powerful cumulative effect over time.
It's like creating that constant background hum of English in your life, isn't it? Just making it normal.
That's a great way to put it, a background hum. And speaking of consistency, that video from Learn English with Kafani, it really hits on that feeling many people have.
Which feeling is that?
Of not quite knowing how to study effectively. Or maybe you know what to do, but you just struggle to stick with any kind of regular plan.
Oh, yeah. I think a lot of learners can relate to that. It's a very common obstacle, isn't it?
Hugely common. And here's an empowering thought, something highlighted by K&N Idiomas Brazil.
Okay.
Even the smallest, most seemingly insignificant goals are actually vital pieces of the puzzle.
So you don't need these massive, ambitious goals right away.
Not at all. Learning just a few new words each week, or maybe practicing a specific grammar point for just 10 minutes a day.
Those small victories.
Exactly. They build momentum. They contribute significantly to your overall fluency. It's all about the compound effect of consistent effort.
I really like that perspective. It takes away some of that pressure, that feeling of needing to make massive, overwhelming changes immediately.
It does.
Yeah.
And K&N Idioms Brazil also makes another really valuable point about your learning environment.
Oh, not just the materials, but the space.
Exactly. It's not just the books or apps you use. It's the physical and maybe even the mental space you create for learning.
How so?
Well, try to make it a place where you genuinely want to spend time engaging with English. Maybe free from distractions, perhaps with some inspiring visuals, comfortable seating.
Setting the mood for learning.
Precisely. A positive learning atmosphere can subtly but powerfully encourage that regular study habit. It makes it less of a chore.
That's a subtle but incredibly important layer, isn't it? Like, would you rather work out in a dingy, uninspiring gym or a bright, welcoming one?
Exactly the same principle applies. Your learning space impacts your motivation, your consistency.
So what's the immediate takeaway for listeners here from this first part?
I think it's that tackling the challenge of efficient English learning starts with, 1, acknowledging those common frustrations. It's okay to feel stuck sometimes.
Right.
2, shifting your mindset towards consistent, small actions rather than giant leaps. And 3, consciously starting to integrate English into the fabric of your daily life, even in small ways.
Okay. Acknowledge, shift mindset, integrate. Got it. Now, let's get down to the nitty-gritty, the practicalities of time management.
The eternal challenge.
Right. You've got work, family, hobbies, life is just busy.
Yeah.
So how do you actually carve out dedicated time for English learning without feeling like you're adding another overwhelming task to your already packed schedule?
This is where strategic organization really becomes your best friend.
Okay.
The article from BSL Idiomas, it really emphasizes the role that technology can play here, helping you structure your study routine effectively.
So using our phones and computers for us, not against us.
Exactly. Think of them not just as sources of distraction, but as powerful tools for managing your learning time.
And one specific technique they highlight, which seems pretty popular for boosting focus, is the Pomodoro technique.
Yes, often facilitated by apps, like the one they mentioned, the Productivity Challenge Timer.
Okay, let's maybe unpack that a bit. For anyone who hasn't heard of it, the Pomodoro technique, what is it basically?
So the core idea is breaking down your study time into focused work intervals. Typically, it's 25 minutes of solid work,
Okay, focused work.
followed by a short break, usually around 5 minutes.
Right.
And then after you complete maybe 4 of these cycles, these Pomodoros, you take a longer break, maybe 15 to 30 minutes.
And why is that effective?
Well, it combats that mental fatigue,
Yeah.
that feeling of your brain turning to mush during long study sessions. By working in these short, intense bursts, you generally maintain better focus and productivity during the work periods. The breaks help you reset.
Makes sense. And BSL Idiomas pointed out something interesting about that app name, Productivity Challenge Timer.
Yeah, just the name itself, being in English, provides that little bit of extra immersion, that tiny bit of exposure.
It's clever, a very subtle way to sneak in a little extra English.
Definitely. But it's not just about these dedicated, structured study blocks, is it?
No, absolutely not. KNN Idiomas Brazil reminds us to be, well, opportunistic.
Opportunistic.
Yeah, look for those smaller, often overlooked pockets of free time throughout your day.
Okay. Like what?
Think about your commute. Could you listen to an English podcast then? Or your lunch break, maybe review some vocabulary flashcards on an app.
Right, those little moments.
Even those few minutes just before you go to sleep could be used for a quick English reading session, maybe a short article or blog post.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if we connect this back to that bigger picture of living the language, it's about weaving English into the existing tapestry of your day, making it fit naturally.
Right.
Topway suggests making it as natural as listening to your favorite music. Or, as both Topway and Social Learn English mention, simply changing the language settings on your phone, your tablet, your laptop.
That seems like such a simple change, but I imagine it forces you to interact with English constantly.
It does. These small, almost passive interactions can have a surprisingly significant impact over time. You're constantly seeing and using the language in real-world contexts.
They really do add up, don't they? Instead of feeling like you need this massive hour-long block of uninterrupted time to make any progress.
Which is often unrealistic for people.
Totally. Instead, start looking for those 10-minute or 15-minute slots that might otherwise just, evaporate.
Like waiting for the kettle to boil.
Exactly. Or listening to a short English news summary while you make coffee. Or reviewing a few new words on an app while you're waiting in line somewhere.
So this raises a really important question for everyone listening to consider right now. Where are those currently underutilized moments in your daily routine?
Where could you intentionally insert just a little bit of English practice?
Identifying those specific time slots, that's the crucial first step towards effective time management for language learning. You have to find the time before you can use it.
That's a great practical point. Okay, so once you've maybe identified when you can study, the next logical step is figuring out what you should actually be focusing on during that time.
Right, which brings us naturally to the importance of goal setting and planning.
Crucial.
Absolutely. Setting clear and, this is key, achievable learning goals is paramount. Both KNN Idiomas Brazil and Jonas Bresson really emphasize this.
Why is it so important?
Well, without a clear target in mind, your efforts can easily become scattered, right? They lack direction. It's like trying to drive somewhere new without knowing the address or even the general direction.
You just end up driving around aimlessly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Wasting time and energy.
And remember, as Topway wisely points out, your goals don't need to be these, grand sweeping statements about achieving perfect fluency by next Tuesday.
Haha. No, definitely not. They can, and probably should, be much smaller and more immediate.
Like what?
Maybe your goal for this week is just to learn 10 new phrasal verbs related to work. Or perhaps it's to feel confident enough to order food in English at a restaurant.
Manageable chunks.
Precisely. Even aiming to learn just one new word every single day, as Topway suggests, is a positive step forward. It's all about building that consistent forward momentum.
Okay. And Jonas Bresson, you mentioned him. He outlines a more structured process.
Yes, he provides a really insightful step-by-step process for structuring an effective study schedule. It's quite comprehensive, actually.
Let's hear it.
Okay, so he suggests starting by honestly assessing the amount of time you realistically have available each week for studying. Be honest with yourself.
No point planning for 10 hours if you only have 2, right?
Exactly. Then, clearly define your specific learning goals. What exactly do you want to achieve? Is it better conversation skills, understanding movies, reading articles?
Get specific.
Very specific.
Yeah.
Next, choose the learning resources apps, websites, books, tutors that align with those specific goals and also your learning style.
Makes sense.
And this is really key. Break down your study time and your goals into smaller, more manageable tasks.
Back to the small steps idea. Like tackling a large project by breaking it down into a series of smaller, less daunting milestones.
Precisely. And he also stresses the importance of establishing a regular schedule. Treat your English study time like any other important appointment in your week. Put it in your calendar.
Okay. Consistency again.
Always. Furthermore, he advises incorporating a variety of activities. Don't just do grammar drills for an hour. Mix it up to keep things engaging and to target different language skills.
Reading, listening, speaking, writing.
All of them. And crucially, he highlights the need for regular review and adjustment of your plan.
Why adjustment?
Because life happens. Your schedule might change. Or you might find a certain approach isn't working for you. Your plan needs to be flexible, not set in stone.
That makes a lot of sense. The need for variety, you mentioned that. Why is that so critical?
Well, think about it. If you only focus on grammar exercises, day in, day out.
You'll probably get good at grammar exercises.
Exactly. But you'll likely miss out on developing your listening comprehension or your ability to actually speak spontaneously.
Right. Your skills become unbalanced.
Totally. Mixing it up, dedicating some time to building vocabulary, some to grammar practice, some to listening to podcasts or watching videos, maybe even trying to have short conversations online or with a language partner. It keeps your brain actively engaged.
And ensures a more well-rounded development of your actual English abilities.
That's the goal. And Jonas Bresson also reminds us of something maybe softer, but just as important. Staying motivated.
The motivation factor. Tricky one.
It can be. He also says be realistic about the pace of your progress. Language learning takes time. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Good reminder. Avoid getting discouraged.
And actively track what you're learning. Keep a journal of new vocabulary or grammar points you've studied, or even just note down the time you've spent practicing.
Why track it?
It provides a tangible sense of accomplishment. You can look back and see how far you've come, which is a great motivator in itself.
Right. It makes the progress visible. Connecting this back to that feeling of being overwhelmed we talked about earlier, having a structured plan, even a flexible one, seems like it would help you feel more in control of your learning journey.
Absolutely. It transforms English learning from this kind of vague, daunting, amorphous task into a series of clear, achievable steps.
Which can significantly reduce anxiety and boost confidence along the way.
Definitely.
Now, we also came across something called the Chronogramma para Aprender and 6 Meses. Sounds very structured.
Yes, it offers a more concrete example of how you might structure your learning over a longer period. It literally breaks down what you could focus on week by week over 6 months.
Wow. Can you give an example?
Sure. For instance, in the very first week, it suggests focusing on topics like, well, talking about routines.
Which we just discussed the importance of.
Exactly. And building vocabulary related to time and reviewing grammar points like prepositions of time, in, on, at, and place.
So it lays out a path.
It does. What's particularly valuable about this kind of chronogramma or schedule is that it provides a ready-made roadmap. It suggests a logical progression through different aspects of the language.
Takes away some of the guesswork, maybe, of deciding what to study next.
Precisely. If you're someone who thrives on structure, something like this could be really helpful.
Okay. And going back to those small moments, those micro moments we talked about earlier with time management.
Yes.
BSL Idiomas introduced the concept of microlearning, didn't they? Through apps like Semper.
They did. It's a really clever idea, actually. Delivering these tiny, bite-sized learning opportunities integrated directly into your daily phone usage.
Like when you're unlocking your screen or something.
Yeah, exactly. A quick vocabulary question here, a short grammar quiz there. It just pops up.
That really highlights this growing trend, doesn't it? Making learning more accessible, less like a separate time-consuming activity that you have to schedule in.
Absolutely. Instead of always needing to carve out these large blocks of time, which can be hard to find, you can leverage these fleeting micro moments throughout your day.
To reinforce your knowledge and just keep English top of mind.
Keeps the momentum going, even on busy days.
Okay, so the key takeaway here on planning seems to be, it's not just about saying you want to learn English.
No, it's much more concrete.
It involves understanding your time limitations, setting realistic and specific goals, breaking those goals down into manageable steps.
Choosing the right resources.
Creating a varied and consistent study schedule that you can actually stick to, but also being flexible enough to adjust it.
You've got it. That's the essence of effective planning.
All right, now let's move on to the tools. The things that can really support you in putting all of this planning into practice. We're talking about technology and learning resources.
Yes, and the landscape here is just incredible now. Technology has opened up an amazing array of tools that can significantly enhance your English learning journey.
Like the BSL Idiomas article pointed out, right? There are all sorts of apps specifically designed to help organize and streamline studies.
Absolutely. Let's break down some of the categories they mentioned. First up, timers based on the Pomodoro technique.
Like the productivity challenge timer we mentioned, and brain focus productivity times.
Exactly. These are great for maintaining focus during those dedicated study sessions, keeping you on track for those 25-minute bursts.
Okay, what else?
Then you have virtual planner apps. My Study Life was one example given.
And what do those do?
Well, they allow you to create a digital calendar specifically for your learning activities. You can schedule your study sessions, set reminders, keep track of assignments or goals. Basically, organize everything in one place.
Accessible across different devices, too, usually.
Typically, yes. And as BSL Idiomas noted, the fact that many of these apps, like Productivity Challenge Timer and My Study Life, often have interfaces primarily in English.
It provides that little extra bit of consistent exposure again, sneaky learning.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Every little bit helps.
Okay, planners, timers. What if you want to track progress more formally?
Good question. BSL Idiomas highlighted apps like Aprobado. These types of apps allow you to log your study time, maybe categorize it by skill.
Like time spent on listening versus time spent on grammar.
Precisely. You can set specific learning goals within the app and even generate reports.
Reports.
Yeah, charts or summaries that can help you visualize your progress over time, see where you're spending your time, identify areas where you might need to focus more attention.
It's like having a little personal study analyst in your pocket.
Kind of. It adds a layer of accountability and insight.
Okay. And we touched on microlearning earlier with Semper.
Right. That app cleverly integrates those quick review questions and vocabulary quizzes into your phone's unlocking process or other moments you use your phone.
Making use of those tiny, otherwise wasted moments throughout the day. Brilliant.
It's a fantastic way to reinforce learning without feeling like you're studying.
What about general organization, notes, resources?
Evernote is a really powerful tool mentioned by BSL Idiomas for that. Great for general organization and note-taking.
How might a learner use it?
You could store notes from your lessons or self-study, save interesting articles or web resources you find online, clip example sentences. You can even use it to collaborate with other learners if you're doing group projects or study sessions.
Very versatile.
Very. And for those maybe engaging with more academic or research-based English materials.
Yeah.
Platforms like Passé were mentioned. These can be valuable resources for finding study materials, summaries, shared notes on specific subjects, often user-generated content.
Okay. And for managing research papers?
Mendeley is an invaluable tool for that. If you're reading a lot of articles or papers in English, it helps you organize them, manage references, generate citations. More for academic learners, perhaps.
Got it. It seems there's an app for almost everything, even alarm clocks.
Yes. BSL Idiomas even mentioned Alarmy, a more sophisticated alarm clock app.
How does that help with English learning?
Well, indirectly.
Huh.
It has various settings to ensure you actually wake up, like making you solve a math problem or take a picture of something specific, and don't just hit snooze repeatedly.
So it helps you stick to that schedule, especially if you plan to study first thing in the morning.
Exactly. It plays a role in maintaining that consistent study schedule by ensuring you actually start your day on time and protect that dedicated morning study slot.
Clever. And for group work.
Project management tools like Trello were suggested. If you're studying with others, maybe preparing for an exam together, Trello can be incredibly useful for organizing tasks, assigning responsibilities, and tracking progress visually.
Wow, okay, so the range is huge.
It really is. And what's really striking, and BSL Idiomas makes a point of emphasizing this, is that many of these tools are free, or at least offer very capable free versions or affordable options.
So effective organization and study support are pretty much within reach for almost everyone. You don't necessarily need a big budget.
Not at all. Accessibility is much better than it used to be. And let's not forget the vast ocean of free content resources available, especially video.
Right, like the Learn English with Tiffany video reminded us. Platforms like YouTube are incredible resources for input.
Absolutely. You can find engaging, authentic English content on virtually any topic that interests you. Cooking, gaming, science, history, comedy, whatever you like.
Which makes the learning process itself more enjoyable, not just effective.
That's key for long-term motivation. Find content you genuinely want to watch or listen to.
Okay. So the key takeaway here on resources seems to be explore. Explore these different technological tools and discover the ones that best align with your individual learning style, your specific needs, and your overall goals. Don't feel you need to use everything.
Exactly. Find your personal toolkit. Maybe it's just a good planner app and a couple of content sources you really enjoy. That might be enough.
Right. Quality over quantity. Okay, so we've talked a lot about structuring time, setting goals, finding resources. Let's shift our focus now to what you should actually be doing during your study time.
Yes, let's dive into active learning strategies.
Because passive exposure isn't enough, right?
It helps, definitely. But active learning is absolutely fundamental for truly internalizing the language and making it your own.
As our diverse range of sources implicitly highlights, it's essential to actively engage with all 4 core language skills.
Remind us.
Reading, writing, listening, and, of course, speaking. You need to work all those muscles.
Makes sense. And that morning routine suggested by Learn English with Tiffany seems like a really fantastic practical framework for incorporating these different skills into a short daily practice.
It really is. It's very concrete. Should we break down the components?
Yeah, let's do that. It starts with writing. Only 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Yes, a brief 5-minute writing session. Now, the key here, especially first thing in the morning, isn't to aim for perfect grammar or, super sophisticated vocabulary.
So what's the goal?
The idea is simply to jot down your plans for the day ahead in English. Today I need to go to the supermarket. I have a meeting at 10. I want to finish the report. Simple stuff.
And why do that?
This seemingly small act helps to gently activate the English language processing part of your brain. It gets things warmed up.
What's really insightful about that initial writing bit is the emphasis Tiffany puts on not getting bogged down in correcting mistakes at this stage.
Exactly. It's not about perfection. It's just about getting your thoughts flowing in English, however simple the sentences might be. Think of it like a mental warm-up.
Okay, priming the brain from more focused English engagement later in the routine. Got it. What's next?
Next up in her suggested routine is a 10-minute input session.
Input meaning listening or reading.
In this case, specifically watching a YouTube video in English. But here's the important part.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily have to be a formal English lesson. In fact, it's often more effective if you choose a video on a topic that genuinely interests you.
Like a hobby or news or a vlog.
Exactly. Something you'd watch anyway, but you watch it in English. While you're watching, make a conscious effort to listen for and note down, say, 5 to 10 new words or expressions that you hear.
Active listening, not just letting it wash over you.
Precisely. This step is all about immersing yourself in authentic English usage within a context that actually holds your attention. When you're genuinely interested, you're naturally more engaged, right?
Yeah, you're more likely to absorb new vocabulary and sentence structures almost intuitively.
Exactly. So 5 minutes writing, 10 minutes input. What follows?
Following that input session is a 10-minute research session.
Research.
Here, you take those 5 to 10 new words or expressions that you jotted down from the video, and you actively look up their definitions. But maybe even more importantly, you should try to find example sentences.
Context.
Exactly. Sentences that show how these words and phrases are actually used in context. This helps you understand their nuances, their connotations, how they fit into natural English conversation.
That's so crucial. The English Central blog also really underscores the value of looking at example sentences.
Yeah.
And then maybe even adapting them to fit your own situations and needs.
Right. It's not just about knowing the dictionary definition of a word. It's about understanding how to use it correctly and appropriately in a real sentence.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've had writing, input, research. What's the final piece of this morning routine?
The final component is a 5-minute application session.
Application. Sounds important.
It is. This is where you go back to that initial journal entry you wrote at the very beginning of the routine, your plans for the day, and you make a conscious effort to rewrite parts of it, this time incorporating maybe 3 to 5 of the new words or expressions that you just learned from the YouTube video and researched.
Closing the loop.
Exactly. You're immediately putting the new language to use in your own context.
What's so powerful about this application step, Tafani suggests, is that it creates these little triggers in your brain. It helps you actively start using this new vocabulary in your own speaking and writing almost immediately.
So it makes them much more memorable and readily accessible for future use rather than just being passive knowledge.
Precisely. You're making a deliberate effort to take those new words off the screen and put them into practice right away.
Yeah.
It really helps solidify them in your long-term memory.
That whole routine, 5 ins writing, 10 input, 10 research, 5 application, that's only 30 minutes total, seems very manageable.
Very. And it covers multiple skills in a structured, purposeful way.
Now, thinking more broadly about active learning, especially improving speaking skills, the YouTube transcripts you mentioned earlier, from Rhoda da Fluencia and Ellen Fernandez.
Yes, they offered some really valuable insights there.
What did they emphasize?
They both really emphasize the importance of actively repeating phrases and even entire sentences that you hear native English speakers use.
Like shadowing.
Exactly like shadowing, or even just simple repetition. It's a fantastic way to improve your pronunciation, your intonation, the rhythm and stress of your speech, your overall fluency, basically.
It's like training your mouth muscles, isn't it? Getting them used to producing the sounds and patterns of English more accurately.
Well, that's a great analogy. By consciously mimicking native speakers, you start to internalize the natural flow of the language.
So the big picture on active learning is it's not just passive absorption. It's not just reading or listening.
No, it's about actively engaging through writing, through focused listening and targeted vocabulary acquisition, through researching how new words are actually used in context.
And crucially, by actively applying what you've learned in your own communication, whether that's rewriting a journal entry or repeating phrases aloud.
That active engagement is what truly builds skill and confidence.
Okay. Now let's take this even a step further. We've talked about dedicated study time, structured routines. What about integrating English even more seamlessly into everyday life, beyond those specific study sessions?
Yes. This is where the real magic often happens, where learning becomes less of a separate task and more of a natural, ongoing part of your daily life.
Making it feel less like work.
Exactly. And our various sources offer a wealth of really practical, concrete examples for how to do this.
Let's hear some. Ellen Fernandez, you mentioned her earlier. She had a simple idea.
A very simple, yet effective technique. She suggests just thinking in English during your regular morning routine.
Just thinking, like an internal monologue.
Yeah. Narrating to yourself in English as you turn off your alarm or make your bed or brush your teeth. Okay, now I'm turning off the alarm. It's 7 a.m. Time to get up. I need to brush my teeth.
That's brilliant. Incredibly accessible. No extra time needed. Just shifting your internal language.
Precisely. And the English Central blog gives us that great list of everyday vocabulary examples for common actions.
Like brush teeth, get ready for bed, take a shower.
Right. Just making a conscious effort to use these specific English terms for your daily activities can really help to reinforce your vocabulary in a meaningful, real-world context.
It connects the word directly to the action.
Exactly. And if we think back to that cronograma para aprender en 6 meses.
The 6-month plan.
Yeah. Remember how talking about routines was the suggested topic for the very first week?
I do.
That really highlights the fundamental importance of being able to describe your daily activities and habits in English. It's a core communication skill. So practicing thinking about them, or even talking about them, is highly relevant.
And what about those in-between moments? Commutes, chores,
Both KNN, Idiomas Brazil, and Topway strongly suggest making the most of those often overlooked times. Listen to English language podcasts or music during your daily commute. Actively listen sometimes, passively other times.
Or while you're doing household chores, maybe, like washing dishes or folding laundry.
Perfect opportunities. Pop in some earbuds and listen to something in English. Watch short English videos or news clips during your lunch break or any other downtime you might have.
It's about filling the dead time with input.
Exactly. And don't underestimate the power of that simple change we mentioned earlier, changing the language settings on all your electronic devices.
Your phone, tablet, computer, both Topway and Social Learning English recommended that, right?
They did. It seems like such a small thing, but it forces you to interact with the language constantly in a practical everyday context. Menu items, notifications, system messages.
It makes English less abstract and more, well, real, part of your daily tools.
It does. Reading news articles or blog posts in English again, Topway suggested this is another fantastic way to integrate the language. Choose topics you're interested in anyway.
So you're getting information and language practice simultaneously.
Killing two birds with one stone.
You could even try to actively use English for simple everyday tasks, couldn't you?
Absolutely. Like making your shopping list in English, or trying to use English when searching for things online. Maybe participating in online forums or social media groups related to your hobbies, but in English.
The more you intentionally surround yourself with the language in your daily life,
the more natural and less daunting it will become. It really shifts from being something you consciously study to something you simply use.
That feels like a key transition point in language learning.
It really is. This holistic approach, where English learning isn't confined just to specific study periods, but rather permeates various aspects of your daily existence. It's incredibly effective for long-term retention, for building real fluency, and ultimately for making the language feel like a natural part of you.
Okay, so integrate. Find those small moments. Change those settings. Think in English. Fantastic advice. Now, we've covered a lot of really valuable ground mindset, time management, goals, resources, active learning, integration.
We certainly have.
But what's the essential element, the glue, maybe, that holds all of this together and really ensures long-term success?
If you had to boil it down, it really comes down to two things, working together.
Which are?
Consistency and review.
Consistency and review. Okay, let's unpack that. Consistency first.
This was a recurring theme across several sources, especially Jonas Persson and Topway. They repeatedly stress that consistency is absolutely key. King, even.
More important than, say, the length of study sessions.
Often, yes. Even short, regular study sessions, maybe just 15 to 30 minutes every single day, are far more effective in the long run than infrequent marathon study sessions that just leave you feeling burnt out and discouraged.
Right. Trying to cram everything in on a Sunday afternoon probably isn't the best strategy.
Usually not. Think of it like tending a garden. Consistent, regular watering, even just a little each day, will yield far better results than sporadic, heavy downpours followed by long droughts.
That's a great analogy. Slow and steady wins the race.
In language learning, it very often does.
Okay, so consistency is crucial. What about the second part, review?
Jonas Persson also really emphasized the critical importance of periodic review, not just of your study schedules, to make sure they still work for you.
But review of the actual material you've learned.
Exactly. It's simply not enough to just encounter a new word or a grammar rule once and expect it to stick forever.
Our brains don't usually work like that, unfortunately.
No, they don't. You need to actively revisit and reinforce that knowledge in your memory through regular review. This is where things like spaced repetition systems, or SRS, can be incredibly effective.
Like flashcard apps that show you words just before you're about to forget them.
Precisely those kinds of tools. They're designed based on how our memory works. Scheduling reviews at increasing intervals.
Makes learning much more efficient.
It really does. And the YouTube video by Luciana Lipio also strongly echoed this sentiment, highlighting the significant benefit of regularly measuring your progress.
Checking in on how you're doing.
Yes, and being willing to adapt your learning strategies as needed. Language learning isn't static. It's a dynamic and very personal journey.
So your approach needs to be flexible.
It has to be. It should evolve as you do. What works brilliantly for you as a beginner might need some tweaking as you reach an intermediate level, and again as you push towards advanced.
So the takeaway here is, make consistency your absolute top priority. Aim for regular, even if short, study sessions. Treat it like brushing your teeth, something you just do.
Great comparison. And intentionally build in periodic review times into your schedule. Don't just learn new stuff all the time. Make time to consolidate what you've already covered.
To solidify your knowledge and maintain that learning momentum.
Exactly. Consistency and review, the power duo.
Okay. Now, to maybe lighten things up just a little bit before we wrap up, we came across a really relatable and slightly humorous anecdote in that Learn English with Tiffany video.
Ah, yes. The story about her teacher, Miss Howard.
And the, let's call it an unconventional teaching method involving writing lines.
Yes. It's a funny little example, isn't it, of how learning can sometimes happen in the most unexpected contexts, even within, well, a disciplinary situation.
Right. So the whole class apparently had to write the same sentence. What was it? I will not talk in class.
Something like that, yes. 100 times, I think she said, as a consequence for misbehaving.
You'd think that would be a horrible, monotonous task.
You would. But Tiffany described how, instead of it being this dreaded chore, the students actually turned it into a sort of shared experience, almost a camaraderie-building exercise.
They were playfully competing to see who could finish first.
Exactly. Racing each other. What's so interesting about this story is that the teacher, Mrs. Howard, her intention was likely punitive, right? A deterrent to future talking. But the students' positive attitude, their sort of group spirit, it transformed the activity into something else entirely.
It really highlights that idea that learning, or at least memorable experiences related to learning, can occur in the most surprising circumstances.
It does. And it also shows how your mindset, how you approach a situation, can significantly impact the outcome, even the learning outcome. They were practicing writing after all.
Albeit a very boring sentence. But yeah, it really just goes to show that even seemingly negative situations or just repetitive tasks can inadvertently have a learning element if you approach them with the right perspective, or at least become a shared memory.
And the fact that Tiffany still remembers this experience so vividly after all those years really speaks to the impact of that shared activity, even though it wasn't exactly a traditional planned lesson.
It's a gentle reminder, maybe, that cultivating a positive learning attitude, even when you encounter challenges or setbacks or just boring repetition in your language journey, can make the entire process much more enjoyable.
And more memorable, and ultimately probably more successful in the long run. Finding the positive or even just the camaraderie can help you push through.
Well said. Okay, so we have covered a huge amount of ground in this deep dive. Mind-blowing amount of useful stuff.
We really have. It's been great exploring all these different angles.
Let's try to bring it all together now with a concise summary. What are the absolute key takeaways for our listeners who want to build their own efficient and effective English learning routine?
Okay, let's recap. First and foremost, set clear and crucially achievable learning goals. Know what you're aiming for, even if it's just a small step forward each day or week.
Got it. Goal setting. Second,
manage your time strategically. Identify those dedicated study blocks, sure, but also learn to capitalize on those smaller, often overlooked moments of free time throughout your day. Integrate it.
Time management and integration.
Third, make smart use of technology and learning resources. Explore the apps, the websites, the platforms, but choose intentionally. Find the tools that genuinely support your learning style and goals. Don't get overwhelmed by options.
Use tech wisely. Fourth point.
Fourth, actively engage with all 4 core language skills: reading, writing, listening, and speaking. Don't neglect any of them. And consider incorporating a structured daily practice like that 30-minute morning routine we discussed to hit multiple skills consistently.
Active engagement across all skills.
Fifth, consciously integrate English into the very fabric of your daily life. Change your device settings, immerse yourself in English language media you enjoy, think in English, use English vocabulary for everyday actions, make it normal.
Daily integration. And sixth,
prioritize consistency above almost everything else. Regular, even short study sessions are far more powerful than infrequent marathon efforts. Make it a habit.
Consistency is king. Okay, what's the final key takeaway?
And finally, number 7. Remember the importance of regular review. Revisit what you've learned to make it stick. And alongside that, be prepared to adapt your learning strategies as you progress. Be flexible, review, and adapt.
Goal setting, time management, smart resource use, active engagement, daily integration, consistency, and review adaptation. That's a powerful framework.
It really covers the core principles we found across all those different sources.
And the really encouraging thing to remember, I think, is that even if you have a genuinely packed, busy schedule.
Which many, many people do.
Right. Even then, by incorporating these small, consistent efforts into your daily routine, you really can achieve significant progress in your English language skills over time.
Absolutely. It's about making English learning a sustainable habit, fitting it into your life, not making it feel like just another chore on your endless to-do list.
Well put. So here's our final thought, our challenge maybe, for you listening right now.
Okay, let's hear it.
Choose just one or two, not all 7 takeaways at once. That might be overwhelming. Just 1 or 2 practical tips that we've discussed today that particularly resonated with you.
Something that felt achievable, maybe even exciting to try.
Exactly. And commit to implementing just those 1 or 2 things immediately into your daily routine. Start small.
Be consistent with those initial changes.
And then really pay attention. Observe yourself.
Yeah.
How do these small adjustments start to impact your learning, your motivation, your confidence over the course of, say, the next week?
Yeah, experiment a little bit, see what happens. Discover what strategies and techniques truly work best for your individual learning style and your specific circumstances.
And always remember, every small, consistent step forward is a genuine victory on your journey to English fluency. Celebrate those small wins.
Absolutely. Progress, not perfection.
Well, that feels like a great place to bring this deep dive to a close.
Today, we're diving deep into something I think, well, pretty much every language learner grapples with at some point.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
It's that really complex, kind of tangled relationship between your accent, the actual process of learning a language, and, your own sense of who you are, your identity.
Oh, okay, yes. That's a huge one. It touches on so many different things.
Exactly. And we've pulled together a real mix of stuff for this. We've got research studies looking at how accents affect perception.
Like how others hear you.
Yeah, precisely. Then there are some really honest discussions from language learning forums Reddit, specifically about that pressure to be perfect.
Oh, the perfectionism trap. Definitely need to talk about that.
We also looked at expert opinions. Language coaches weighing in on setting realistic goals.
Oh, it is key.
And some more, let's say, academic articles. Stuff about the psychology of language learning and this whole sometimes controversial idea of native speakerism.
Right, the whole native speaker ideal and what that actually means or doesn't mean.
Right.
It's a fascinating mix, psychology, sociology, linguistics, all kind of meeting up.
Totally. We've got everything from hard data to really personal stories.
So what's the overall goal here? What are we hoping to achieve with this deep dive?
Well, our mission, if you like, is to really unpack all those pressures and perceptions surrounding accent when you're learning a language. We want to offer some insights.
Maybe some surprising ones.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
And just give everyone listening some food for thought. Whether you're just starting out or you've been learning for years, it's a landscape that can feel, pretty challenging sometimes.
Definitely. Okay, sounds good. Where are we starting?
Right, let's dive in. First stop, how accents are actually perceived by other people.
Makes sense. External views often shape our internal goals, don't they?
They really do.
Yeah.
So there was this really interesting piece of research out of the University of Chicago.
Okay.
And what they found was pretty striking. It seems that having a foreign accent can sometimes lead listeners to perceive the speaker as less truthful.
Less truthful. Wow.
Yeah.
That's quite a finding.
Isn't it? It really highlights this subtle, maybe unconscious bias that can just exist out there in communication.
Yeah, like our brains are making these quick connections between how someone sounds and whether we trust what they're saying without us even realizing it.
Exactly. And this wasn't just some small off-the-cuff study either. It got support from the National Science Foundation.
Okay, so it has some weight behind it.
Definitely. And they did it quite cleverly. They used actual audio samples in the experiments.
How did that work?
They had recordings of the same sentences, right? But read by different people. Native English speakers, people with a slight accent, and then people with heavier accents.
So they could compare listener reactions directly based on the accent strength.
Precisely. It gave them a way to actually measure how accent might sway someone's judgment about honesty.
Yeah.
It wasn't just about vague feelings.
That's fascinating. You can sort of picture the setup, listening to the same information but reacting differently just because of the delivery.
Yeah. So what does that really mean for someone learning a language? What's the takeaway?
Well, I think a really big insight here is how this kind of unconscious bias could potentially affect learners in, very real-world situations.
Like job interviews.
Exactly. Or presentations, or even just daily interactions. Could someone who's perfectly qualified but has a noticeable accent be subtly disadvantaged? Seen as less credible, maybe?
It raises some pretty big questions about fairness and opportunity, doesn't it?
It really does. And for you, the listener, as a language learner, it might tap into that feeling deep down, that desire not just to be understood, but to be believed, to be seen as credible.
Yeah, because you're already working hard just to communicate clearly in a new language.
And then this research suggests your accent itself might be adding this whole other layer of challenge, even if nobody's consciously thinking about it.
It really makes you wonder how much these subtle biases shape things, our interactions, our self-perception.
Definitely something to keep in mind as we talk about the pressures learners feel. That external perception piece is powerful.
It certainly is. Okay, so let's shift gears a bit. Moving from those sort of broader perceptions to the really personal side of learning. We found this thread on the language learning subreddit that I think a lot of people will relate to.
Okay.
It was from a user called Jerry Harryberry. And they were talking very openly about their struggles with perfectionism, just needing everything to be perfect. Does that sound familiar?
Oh, absolutely. That's probably one of the most common hurdles I see, that urge to get it right immediately.
He described this intense need to speak Spanish, that was his target language, with absolutely no accent, no mistakes at all.
Like zero tolerance for error.
Yeah. And if he didn't understand every single word someone said, he'd get incredibly frustrated, felt like giving up.
That's tough. And that kind of pressure, it often backfires, doesn't it? Leads to burnout instead of progress.
Definitely. But what made this post really interesting and maybe more intense for him was the connection to his identity.
How so?
Well, Spanish was his ethnic language. He mentioned being Mexican, but not being raised speaking Spanish.
Okay, so that adds a whole other layer of emotional weight, doesn't it?
Exactly. The struggle wasn't just about conjugating verbs, right? It felt like a disconnection from his own culture, his heritage.
Wow. That makes the perfectionism understandable, in a way, even if it's not helpful. The stakes feel so much higher when it's tied to who you are and where you feel you belong.
Totally. The pressure must have felt immense. But the amazing thing was the response from the Reddit community.
Yeah. What kind of advice came through?
It was really supportive, really insightful, people sharing their own experiences. One person suggested, maybe it's just about maturity in the learning process, or simply needing more practice.
Like you grow into accepting mistakes.
Yeah. They share their own journey, learning English, Spanish, Chinese, and how eventually they just accepted that mistakes are part of it. You can't avoid them.
That's a good point. Language learning isn't linear, it's messy. Embracing the mess is part of it.
But then someone else was a bit more direct.
Oh.
They suggested that extreme perfectionism might even have a hint of arrogance about it.
Arrogance. How so?
Like, it's expecting to be flawless right away is just unrealistic.
Yeah.
They really hammered home that making mistakes is absolutely fundamental. You have to make them to learn.
That's a strong take, but I see the point. Humility is pretty important when you're learning anything complex. You have to be willing to be bad at it for a while.
Right. And lots of people echoed that, encouraging Jerry Berry to just throw themselves in. Learn by doing, by actually trying to speak rather than waiting until everything feels perfect in their head.
Get out of the analysis paralysis. That's crucial. You learn so much more from trying and failing than from just studying theory. It's about that comprehensible output idea, pushing yourself to produce language, even flawed language.
Someone else pointed out something really insightful, that the pressure to fit in ASAP, especially with that cultural connection, that itself could be the root cause of the perfectionism, that desperate need for immediate acceptance.
That makes a lot of sense, the emotional stakes driving the unrealistic expectations.
Yeah. And there was a really helpful distinction someone made, too. They said, maybe the goal isn't to eliminate the fear of mistakes entirely, because maybe that's impossible.
Right. Fear is pretty natural.
But to learn how to manage it.
Okay, practical strategies. Like what?
Yeah. Like focusing on just one skill at a time. Practice that one thing, maybe pronunciation of a specific sound or using a particular grammar structure until it feels more automatic. Break it down.
Small wins. Build confidence piece by piece. That can definitely help lower the anxiety, make it feel less overwhelming.
And then there was this simple, powerful mantra someone shared. To learn a language, one has to make lots of mistakes.
Obvious, but so true, and so hard to actually internalize sometimes. We know it logically, but emotionally, mistakes can still feel like failure.
Exactly. Reframing them as just beta points, maybe, learning opportunities, that's a big mental shift.
It really is.
There was also advice to just get out there and practice, even if it feels awkward. Someone joked that native speakers can be ruthless sometimes. Unintentionally, hopefully.
But they're also the best teachers because you get that real-world feedback.
Yeah, immersion, even small doses of real interaction is invaluable. It shows you how the language actually works, not just how the textbook says it works. Someone else touched on the deeper fear, the fear of criticism, and reminded everyone to focus on the main goal. Just communicating. Don't get totally bogged down in perfecting every little detail right at the start.
Prioritize getting your meaning across. Clarity over perfection, especially early on. That definitely reduces the pressure.
One user had a more sort of philosophical take. They suggested just stopping trying so hard.
Letting go a bit.
Yeah. Embrace the imperfections. They compared language to something that flows and ebbs. I like that image. Less rigid.
That's a lovely way to put it. Acknowledging that progress isn't always forward. Sometimes you plateau. Sometimes you feel like you regress. It's natural. Trust the process.
And there was appreciation for the effort itself. Celebrating the fact that being bilingual or multilingual, even with an accent, is a huge achievement. That bilingual proficiency is valuable in itself.
Absolutely. It's something to be really proud of, regardless of how close you sound to a particular native speaker ideal.
Then there was this slightly unconventional suggestion. Someone suggested practicing while slightly intoxicated to lower inhibitions.
The Dutch courage approach to language learning.
Right. Though Jerry Hareberry quickly pointed out they were underage, so definitely not advice for everyone.
No, definitely not. Huge caveats there. But I guess the underlying idea of finding ways to reduce that self-consciousness is valid, even if the method isn't recommended.
Absolutely. But overall, that Reddit thread was just full of empathy and practical advice. Really showed how common that perfectionism struggle is. Makes you think about your own learning, doesn't it? Ever feel that intense pressure?
Oh, for sure. I think almost everyone who learns a language goes through phases of wanting it to be perfect now. It's natural. But as that thread shows, letting go of that immediate perfection is just so crucial for actually sticking with it and enjoying it.
Yeah, the enjoyment factor is huge. It really highlights how much the psychological side matters, maybe just as much as the grammar rules.
Definitely. Which leads us nicely into this next area, doesn't it? That very common goal, wanting to sound like a native speaker.
Right. We looked at an article and a podcast episode from Accents Way magazine called Speak English Like a Native Speaker, the Myth. The title kind of gives away their stance, huh?
It does suggest they're going to challenge that idea. Which is interesting because for many learners, that is the ultimate goal they set themselves.
Exactly. And their main argument is that setting that as your only goal, aiming solely to sound exactly like a native, can actually backfire. It can be demotivating and breed insecurity instead of confidence.
Okay, why do they argue that? What are the pitfalls of aiming for that native sound?
Well, first off, they point out the whole idea of speaking like a native assumes there's just one single correct way to speak English.
Which is obviously not true.
Right. Native speakers themselves have tons of different accents, regional grammar, slang. The standard English often taught is just one variety, usually associated with a specific group.
That's such a critical point. The diversity within native speakers is massive. So which native are you even trying to sound like? It sets up this narrow, often unreachable target.
Exactly. And secondly, while you might think aiming high like that keeps you motivated.
Yeah, setting ambitious goals.
They argue it can actually amplify the two biggest fears that hold learners back.
Which are?
The fear of not being good enough and the fear of rejection or being judged.
Because you're constantly comparing yourself to this potentially impossible ideal, so you always feel like you're falling short.
Precisely. It creates this constant state of feeling inadequate, even if you're actually making great progress.
That makes sense. So instead of celebrating milestones, you're focused on the gap between you and this perfect native speaker.
Yeah. And the coach behind Accents Way, she shared her own story, which was really powerful. She's a non-native speaker herself.
Okay.
And she talked about how trying to force herself into this perfect standard English mold made her feel incredibly restricted, always afraid of making a mistake, constantly monitoring herself.
So the goal itself was creating anxiety.
Yes. And she said it wasn't until she consciously decided to let go of that pressure, stop trying to pass as, say, an American English speaker, that she actually found real freedom in her communication.
So shifting the goal actually improved her ability to use the language.
That's what she said. She felt more comfortable, more able to just express herself, communicate effectively and confidently like she does in her native language. The focus shifted.
From imitation to actual communication and self-expression, that's a huge shift. When you're not so worried about the how, you can focus on the message you want to convey.
Exactly. And the podcast episode also pointed listeners to other related topics they covered, like overcoming fear of judgment and building confidence.
Which makes sense. It all ties together: accent, confidence, fear. Addressing the mindset is key.
Definitely. And it was really telling reading the comments from people who listened or read the article. So many people said things like, wow, I realized I had the wrong goal all along.
Really? People resonated with that message.
Big time. One person mentioned they'd always thought they had to sound native to be accepted, even though people already told them they spoke clearly and were easy to understand.
Ah, so they were chasing an ideal even when their actual communication was already effective.
Yeah. They realized that the clarity of their thoughts and being able to express them was way more important than perfect pronunciation.
That's a great insight. Focus on the substance, not just the surface sound.
Another listener said they'd had this wrong goal from the very beginning, thinking that sounding native would magically fix everything. They were grateful for the article, helping them set more realistic and ultimately more fulfilling aims.
It really shows how deeply ingrained that native speaker benchmark can be, and how liberating it can be to question it and redefine success for yourself.
Absolutely. Focusing on communication, clarity, confidence, that seems like a much healthier path for most people than chasing this often elusive native ideal.
It certainly sounds more sustainable and less likely to lead to frustration.
Which brings us to maybe the darker side of really wanting to sound native.
The dark side. Okay, intriguing.
Well, we watched a couple of really insightful YouTube videos, one from Veronica's Language Diaries and another from the English Coach, and they both explored some of the negative consequences of making sounding native the ultimate goal.
Okay, what kind of negative aspects did they bring up?
Veronica, in her video, talked a lot about identity. She felt that trying to completely erase her native accent, she's a native Russian speaker, felt like losing a part of herself.
Because language is so tied to culture and self.
Exactly. She described it as feeling like she was suppressing a fundamental part of who she is, sacrificing her authenticity just to try and blend in perfectly.
That's a really powerful point. Our native language is so deeply woven into our being. Trying to cut that out entirely, I can see how that would feel like a loss.
She even admitted that at one point she really wanted an identity that wasn't hers. She was consciously trying to sound 100% American.
Wow.
And whenever her Russian accent slipped out, even slightly, she felt like she'd failed.
That constant pressure to perform, to hide, it must be exhausting and really chip away at your confidence.
And she pointed out this irony. While she was trying so hard to fit in with English speakers, she actually started to feel disconnected from her own Russian culture.
How so?
Like wanting to use English phrases when speaking Russian with family. It felt weird, inauthentic to her.
That's fascinating. So the pursuit of one linguistic identity started to erode the other one, a kind of unintended consequence.
Yeah. So eventually she made a conscious choice to actually embrace her unique way of speaking English, including her Russian influences, even using Russian expressions sometimes if they fit, even if there wasn't a perfect translation.
And how did that feel?
Liberating, basically. She found she could connect better with people because she wasn't hiding. She was just being herself, accent included.
That makes sense. Authenticity is often more connecting than forced perfection. People respond to genuine expression.
She also made the point that, look, no matter how hard you try, people might still ask, where are you from?
Yeah, that's often true.
And she reframed that, saying, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Your accent tells a story about your life, your journey. It's part of who you are.
Changing the narrative from my accent gives me away to my accent tells my story, that's a powerful shift.
Definitely. She also talked really openly about accent anxiety, that fear of being noticed, making mistakes. It actually made her clam up sometimes. She'd choose silence over speaking, which obviously hinders learning.
The classic paralysis by analysis, fueled by fear of judgment, it's a real barrier.
So her big message was, accents are natural, not mistakes. The goal should be clear, confident communication, and crucially, having fun with language.
Bringing the joy back into it, that's so important.
She also mentioned the imposter phenomenon, feeling like you don't really belong, even if you're fluent, just because you have an accent.
Yeah, that feeling of being a fraud despite your skills. It's surprisingly common.
Ultimately, she argued for owning your unique experience. You don't need to change your core self to fit in. And she tackled the bias issue head-on, acknowledging that yes, negative stereotypes about accents exist, But the bias is the problem, not the accent itself.
That's a vital distinction. Don't internalize prejudice. Challenge the bias instead.
And she ended with this great line: "The best language learner is the one having the most fun."
I love that. It shifts the focus entirely from performance pressure to engagement and enjoyment.
Okay, so then the English coach. She also dug into this. She started by asking, what do we even mean by native?
Good question. It's often used vaguely.
And she drew a line between being inspired by an accent, which can be positive, and wanting to pass as a native, which can be problematic.
Right. Inspiration versus imitation driven by insecurity. A key difference.
She warned about setting the bar so high that anything less than passing feels like failure. Echoes of that perfectionism again.
That all or nothing thinking. Very discouraging.
And she talked about the feeling of constantly copying, imitating, how that can lead to just never feeling good enough in your own right.
Because you're always measuring yourself against someone else, not your own progress.
She also mentioned how learners can subconsciously start seeking validation through compliments on their accent, like needing that external, "Wow, you sound just like a native," to feel good.
Which makes your confidence dependent on others' opinions, rather than your own sense of competence. Not ideal.
Then she made this really interesting point about a boxing in effect.
Boxing in? What's that?
It's where learners might avoid using certain words or expressions because they don't associate them with a specific native accent they're aiming for. So they actually limit their own vocabulary and range.
Oh, that's fascinating. So trying to sound like one type of native speaker actually stops you from using the full breadth of the language?
Potentially, yeah. You missed a chance to create your own unique blend, bringing your own background into it. She argued that letting go of the pressure to sound native actually increases freedom and self-expression.
Allowing your own linguistic identity to enrich your English rather than trying to suppress it.
She also pointed out, realistically, that our ingrained native accents are often really persistent, even with effort.
True, some features are very hard to change completely.
And the irony that worrying so much about your accent can actually make you more anxious, which leads to more mistakes.
The self-fulfilling prophecy of anxiety.
Another interesting point. If you do manage to sound very native-like, people might assume you have native-level cultural knowledge, too.
Leading to potential misunderstandings or awkward moments if you don't actually have that deep cultural context.
Exactly. It sets up an expectation that might be hard to meet.
That's a subtle but important point.
Her core argument was that focusing so much on how your accent is judged means you're kind of giving away your power in communication.
Placing yourself in a position to be evaluated solely on that surface level.
Yeah. Her advice: use native speakers as role models. Absolutely. Be inspired. But ultimately, find your own voice. Let your accent change naturally over time with practice and self-expression. Don't force it into a specific mold.
More organic growth focused on authentic communication, not just mimicry. That sounds like a much healthier approach.
It really does. And all of this, the anxiety, the identity issues, the pressure, points directly to the psychology involved, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Which brings us to the affective filter. We looked at a Semantic Scholar article on this.
Right. Can you explain that concept a bit, the affective filter?
Sure. It's a key idea in second language acquisition theory. Basically, it refers to the emotional factors, things like anxiety, motivation, self-confidence, that can act like a filter, either helping or hindering language learning.
Like a mental gatekeeper.
Exactly. If the filter is low, meaning you're relaxed, motivated, confident, language input can get in more easily, and you're more willing to try speaking. If the filter is high, you're anxious, unmotivated, lacking confidence, it blocks the input and makes learning much harder.
And the article talked about attitude, right? How a positive versus negative attitude affects learning speed and commitment.
Yes. A positive outlook generally lowers the filter, making you more receptive and persistent. A negative attitude raises the filter, creating barriers. Mindset is crucial.
It also broke down language anxiety into components. There was communication apprehension.
That general fear of actually speaking.
Test anxiety.
Stress around exams or evaluations.
And the one really relevant here, fear of negative evaluation.
Right. Being overly worried about what others think of your language skills, your accent, your mistakes.
And this fear, the article pointed out, directly raises that affective filter. It creates a barrier, makes you less likely to take risks, less likely to absorb information.
Precisely. That's why a supportive, low-stress learning environment is so vital. It helps lower that filter so learning can actually happen effectively.
The article showed clear links, correlations between high anxiety and lower performance in language learning.
Which makes total sense. If you're constantly worried about sounding perfect, about not having a native accent, about being judged, that anxiety is going to get in the way of your actual learning and progress. It becomes a self-defeating cycle.
All that psychological baggage really slams the brakes on, doesn't it?
It really can. Which is why understanding these factors is just as important as understanding grammar.
Okay, so we've seen the internal pressures, the psychology.
Yeah.
But what about the wider context, the societal views? That brings us to native speakerism.
Yes, the Castledown article on the problem of native speakerism in language education. This adds another really important layer to the conversation.
So what exactly is native speakerism? How did they define it?
Essentially, it's an ideology, a widespread belief system that automatically privileges native speakers over non-native speakers. It basically says native speakers are inherently better teachers and the ultimate models of language proficiency.
Even if a non-native speaker is highly qualified and proficient.
Exactly. It's an assumption based on nativeness rather than actual skill or training. And it has some pretty discriminatory effects.
Like how it affects teachers. The article talked about stereotyping.
Right. There's this idea of the native speaker ideal, usually someone from a specific, often Anglophone country. This leads to discrimination against qualified non-native teachers. Their skills might be overlooked simply because they aren't native.
Even they speak the language brilliantly and are amazing teachers.
Unfortunately, yes. The ideology prioritizes birthright over competence sometimes. And this puts a huge psychological burden on non-native teachers.
How so?
Constant comparison, feeling insecure even if they're excellent, having their authority questioned, maybe facing limited career opportunities compared to native-speaking colleagues. It's demoralizing.
That sounds incredibly unfair and stressful.
It is, and it's a loss for language education because these teachers often bring unique strengths.
And what about the impact on students? How does native speakerism affect learners?
Well, it can lead students to develop stereotypical beliefs too. Like thinking they must learn from a native speaker to get authentic skills.
And maybe devaluing teachers who aren't native.
Yes, potentially. It can also lead them to develop biases against certain accents, including their own. They might start seeing their non-native accent as wrong or inferior.
So it fuels that internal pressure we've been talking about.
Absolutely. It reinforces the idea that the native accent is the only acceptable goal. And it also robs students of role models.
How do you mean?
By only highlighting native speakers, it overlooks the incredible inspiration that successful non-native speakers and teachers can provide. Seeing someone who learned the language successfully, just like them, can be incredibly motivating.
Non-native teachers can offer unique insights from their own learning journey too, right?
Exactly. They've walked the path the student is on. They often understand the challenges intuitively.
So the article suggested ways to combat this. Solutions.
Yes. Things like redefining teaching competence based on actual skills and proficiency, not just nativeness. Diversifying hiring practices. Promoting inclusivity of all linguistic backgrounds. And just raising awareness about the problems with this ideology.
It really connects the dots, doesn't it? How these broader societal biases feed into the personal pressure learners feel to sound native.
It's all interconnected. The external messages and the internal anxieties influence each other. Challenging native speakerism benefits everyone.
Okay, so we've covered perception, perfectionism, the native myth, the psychology, the societal biases. What about just keeping going? Motivation. That's always a big one.
Absolutely crucial. If you lose motivation, none of the rest matters much.
We looked at an article from Dagan Des, interpreting that really stressed embracing mistakes, seeing them as key to progress.
Which we've touched on a lot. That mindset shift is fundamental.
And it also highlighted just the sheer importance of regular practice for building both skill and confidence. Consistent effort pays off.
No shortcuts, really. Time and practice are essential ingredients.
We also found another Reddit thread, this one specifically about motivation struggles.
Okay. What was the situation there?
It was started by someone of Mexican heritage who wasn't raised speaking Spanish, but was trying to learn it. Despite that connection, they were really struggling to stay motivated. Even feeling like, what's the point?
That feeling of why bother can be really tough to overcome, especially when maybe progress feels slow or the goal feels distant.
Definitely. But again, the community came through with tons of advice. A big theme was making it a daily habit, not relying on motivation.
Discipline over fleeting inspiration. That's key for long-term goals.
Yeah, build it into your routine, make it non-negotiable, even if it's just for a short time each day.
Consistency compounds over time.
Finding enjoyable content was another huge one. Watching shows, listening to music, reading things you actually like in the target language.
Makes it feel less like study and more like leisure. Connect it to your interests.
Someone mentioned feeling like learning a language is a superpower, which is a fun way to think about it. Using travel plans as a motivator came up too.
Having a concrete goal, like a trip, can definitely provide focus and impetus.
Other tips included engaging with books and podcasts, trying immersion if possible, switching up study methods to avoid boredom.
Keeping it fresh is important. Avoid getting stuck in a rut.
And really connecting it to personal interests. Also, focusing on doing things in the language, not just learning about it.
Active use versus passive study makes it much more real and rewarding.
Having a strong why, a reason, or even a deadline was mentioned. And defining a minimum daily effort, like, I'll do at least 10 minutes no matter what.
Setting achievable minimums helps maintain momentum even on busy or low energy days.
Ultimately, it boiled down to finding what makes it feel less like a chore for you personally, what makes you want to engage with it.
Because what works for one person might not work for another. You have to find your own sustainable rhythm and sources of enjoyment.
And looking at all this motivation advice, it really highlights how aiming for that potentially unrealistic goal of a perfect native accent could actually drain your motivation, couldn't it?
Absolutely. If your primary goal feels impossibly far away or leads to constant frustration, it's going to be hard to stay motivated, which really suggests the need to shift focus.
Exactly. So bringing all these threads together, what's the alternative focus? If not sounding native, then what?
Well, based on everything we've discussed, it seems like a much healthier, more productive focus would be on several other things. Like first and foremost, clear and effective communication. Can you get your message across? Can people understand you? That's the core purpose of language.
Right. Intelligibility over flawless imitation.
Then building confidence. Feeling comfortable actually using the language, even with imperfections. That comes from practice and positive experiences.
Confidence empowers you to speak more, learn more.
Also, embracing your own unique voice,
Yeah.
your background, your perspective. They enrich your use of the language. Don't try to erase yourself.
Celebrate your linguistic identity.
Finding enjoyment in the process, making it something you look forward to, not dread. That intrinsic motivation is powerful.
Connecting with the language and culture in meaningful ways. Go beyond the textbook. Find real-world relevance.
That provides context and purpose.
Overcoming that fear of mistakes. Actively reframing errors as essential learning opportunities.
Seeing them as feedback, not failure.
And finally, just appreciating the value of being bilingual or multilingual. Recognizing it as a strength, an asset.
Taking pride in your linguistic skills, whatever your accent sounds like.
So it's a whole shift in perspective, really. Away from an external, often unattainable benchmark towards internal progress, effective communication, and personal growth.
Exactly. It's about the journey and what you can do with the language, not just how closely you mimic one specific model.
Okay, so as we start to wrap up this deep dive, the big takeaway seems clear, doesn't it?
I think so. It's not that native speakers aren't good models or that improving pronunciation isn't worthwhile.
No, not at all. Inspiration is great. Working on clarity is important.
But making sounding exactly like a native the be-all and end-all, that's where the problems can start. It can be counterproductive, anxiety-inducing, and ultimately detract from the real joys and benefits of learning a language.
So the more helpful approach, focus on confident, clear communication. Embrace your own voice. Enjoy the incredible adventure.
Precisely. Focus on progress, connection, authentic self-expression, not perfect imitation.
So for everyone listening, as you continue on your own language path, maybe take a moment to reflect. Ask yourself, is chasing that native accent really serving me? Is it helping me enjoy this? Or could shifting my focus make the journey more positive, more successful?
It's a really personal reflection, but potentially a very valuable one. Be kind to yourself. Celebrate your progress. It's a huge undertaking.
It really is. Well, thank you so much for joining us today for this deep dive. We really appreciate you spending your time with us digging into this.
Yes, thank you. It's been fascinating to explore all these different angles. Lots to think about.
Definitely.